Have you had an encounter you'd like to hear narrated on this channel? If so, send me an email with all the details. You can send your email to contact@buckeyebigfoot.com. Hi there. This story isn't mine. It was my great-grandfather's. Years back, he told me this story while he had me type it up. At the time, I didn't know what I would do with it. I didn't know there were places that told other people's Bigfoot stories and places you could actually make a so-called report. But in the last year, I've been looking around on the internet. I've been finding a lot of things about Bigfoot, and somehow I found your channel. I thought I would go ahead and send this in. Attached, you will find the document that I typed up for him in 2020. That was the year that my great-grandfather turned 100. He passed on 4 months later after I typed this up. You know, every centenarian hears the same questions. The most frequent we get is, what's the secret to your longevity? If I could answer that, everyone would live to be 100 like me. The other question I get is more logical, and I think I can answer that one. How much have you seen in 100 years? It's true that I've seen a great many things in 100 years, especially when I include my 4 years of service overseas in World War II. That provided me with a lifetime of stories. But really, the wildest thing I've ever seen in my 100 years happened when I was 12 years old. That was 1932. And the Great Depression was raging. Hope had been squeezed out of my small little town, as it had been everywhere else. The local newspaper folded, partly because readers simply couldn't afford subscriptions, but also because businesses could no longer afford the advertising rates. I genuinely believe that's the leading reason why there was no real coverage of what happened on the strangest day of my life. Like other stories of wild happenings, my story starts out like an ordinary day. I woke up thinking it would be a normal day like any other. But during the Depression, that wasn't always good news. We had lost our car because my father had been laid off from his job. We kept hearing about how he would be called back to work soon, but we weren't holding our breath. Anyway, that's why my mother and I were out walking that day. She wanted to go downtown to do her banking, mail some letters, and then stop by the market. She needed me to help carry things home. When we walked down Main Street, where an elementary school now stands on one corner and a car detailing shop now stands on the other, we spotted the most unusual sight I'd ever seen. From my vantage point, it looked like a gorilla. But that couldn't be right, though. What would a gorilla be doing in our sleepy little town? I turned to my mother and asked her if she saw it. She said she did, but that we should keep heading on our way. To do anything else would be foolish. Those were her exact words. I asked her what she thought it was. She said she didn't know, but I heard the tremor in her voice. Not only did she not know, she most certainly did not want to know. In those days, we made our own fun. As you can imagine, tough times had thrown up roadblocks to doing even that, and I was a boy who craved excitement. I'd never seen a gorilla, an ape, or anything of that sort outside of drawings and textbooks. And I hadn't seen very many of those either. I wanted to get a closer look at this thing in the worst way. If I didn't, I knew I would be sorry. When I advanced down Main Street, my mother grabbed my wrist, and she tried to pull me back. But I wouldn't be deterred, though. I meant to get a good look at this thing at all cost. When I broke free from my mom, I sprinted down the sidewalk. I heard my mother shouting at me, but I didn't listen. When I drew closer, the ape thing hadn't moved, not at all. It was standing almost statue-like across from the steel plant that had once employed my father, and where in the future I would later rack up over 40 years of service. When I came to within about 15 feet of this creature, I skidded to a stop, actually using my heels. You normally only see cartoon characters doing that, but I had plenty of reason for halting myself any way I had to. It had claws. I could see them now, up close, and seeing those stopped me outright. Claws in the darkest, fiercest eyes I'd ever seen. This thing must have weighed 500 pounds or more. Yeah, I'm no expert, you understand, but it must have been close to 5 times my size. If I had to guess, I would put it at 6'5" or 6'7". It was hairy, all right, but you wouldn't think of that first part if you saw it. Not after seeing its claws and eyes. When it opened its mouth, there were 2 rows of the sharpest teeth I'd ever seen. Honest to goodness, I thought it could chew through a telephone pole. Part of me craved an adventure, the way young boys often do. This thing piqued my curiosity in such a way because you didn't see that sort of thing in our little town. In fact, you almost never saw anything at all interesting around here. I ran up to it because I thought some kind of ape had found its way into our town. I was just a young boy, so I didn't consider the consequences. Once I drew closer, I realized this was no ape. This thing, this monster, was far more sinister than anything I could have imagined. And I knew I was going to die. Forget about the life I might have had ahead of me. I would live to be no more than my 12 years old if this creature had anything to say about it. I felt certain of that. But this creature obviously couldn't give human expression, but I seemed to read something on its face. It seemed to say this was its town, even though my family had been there for over 100 years at that point. This was its town, and I was an intruder. I backed away, wanting to retreat to my mother, out of instinct, though my mother wouldn't have been able to do anything more to this beast than I could. The creature's eyes had fixed themselves on me, and it began to advance slowly toward me, stalking in an oddly cat-like way. My heartbeat and my breathing quickened. My hands and legs quaked, and I honestly doubted that I would escape this situation alive. I don't remember hearing my own words, but I do recall my lips moving. I pleaded with the monster not to hurt me, but I didn't think it was going to pay me any heed. I had already learned at a young age that not every living thing in this world is capable of compassion or mercy. I wanted to run and not backstep. Had I done that, the beast surely would have chased me. I'm as certain of that as I am of my own name. Right when I thought it would charge at me, a car passed, suddenly distracting it. Now you would think that would create an escape hatch for me, but I knew better. The creature would be too fast for me to successfully run from. I don't care how much it weighed. I had to hope for another blessing to come my way. Thankfully, the creature turned and chased the car down Main Street like some kind of dog. Now, that might sound a little wild, but it bolted right past where the library would be built in the 1960s, and it shrank into nothing more than a dot in the distance. My heart didn't slow down, though. It still jackhammered against my chest. I knew darn well how close to death I'd really come, and I felt thankful to still be breathing. By then my mother had caught up to me. She grabbed my wrist and yanked me backwards. Yes, that beast was dangerous, and I am sure it was intent on killing me for approaching it the way I did. and that was why my mother was so angry. Of course, her other bone of contention was that I had dared to defy her. You did not do that in those days with your parents, unless, of course, you wanted to land in a heap of trouble. My mother grounded me when we returned home. That may sound harsh to some, since I'd had a horrifying experience, to say the least, but she actually went easy by her standards. Normally, she meted out far stiffer punishments for lesser acts of defiance. And that suited me just fine. Anything to stay safe and away from that creature. But I felt ashamed, though, and that's the strange thing. I felt like I should have calmed down and felt lucky to be alive. Maybe my zeal to act older than my age made me want to be braver, but reality also had something to say. While in my room, I overheard Mom and Dad talking. Dad said something about how the beast had been spotted down by Parton's coffee shop at the end of Main Street, and a friend of his from the steel plant told him he nearly choked on a jelly donut at the sight. Another friend had seen it race past the Catholic Church, and apparently there was yet another sighting by the hospital. Based on the limited gossip, more than a handful of people had seen it, and there must have been many more. Now, two things seemed sure. This was not a gorilla, and I had not lost my mind or imagined anything. Being grounded didn't feel like the worst punishment in those days. I had books to keep me company. There was no television or internet, remember. There was no phone in my hand nonstop either. No, at the time I enjoyed the Hardy Boys, which were new at the time, and I realized how much safer their adventures were compared to what just happened to me in real life. But that night, I felt scared. I could deny it all I wanted, but I couldn't strike down the biting sense of fear. Once the sun went down, all I could think about was that big hairy beast, its claws, teeth, and fierce eyes. It was like how I used to hide under the covers because I honestly worried Count Dracula would appear at my bedroom window. I could thank the Bela Lugosi movie I'd seen for that one. I had just seen it the year before, and that was after my mother told me not to go see it. But now, though, I had a good reason to think that the monster could be after me for real, and not just because of what I'd seen, but owing to the fact that the creature had not been caught. Number one, the thing was real, as confirmed by multiple eyewitnesses. Folks around here don't talk about those things unless they truly saw something. Second, it could have left town for all I knew, but maybe not. It was out there. I felt that. Much like my nightmares about the Count, the idea that such a creature could be running around at large unnerved me too much to get a good night's sleep. Before turning in, I heard Mom and Dad talk about how people might need to band together to deal with the thing, as Mom called it. Not everything was handled by law enforcement in those days. Sometimes regular people banded together to fight a perceived common enemy. I'll tell you my real problem, though, that night. I felt like a coward at worst and a wimp at best. I had run away from the thing the way anyone would, I guess, and yet it bothered me. My father fought in World War I just a few years before I was born, and so many times I had heard numerous stories of bravery. I might have only been 12 years old at the time, but I really wanted to think I could display the same kind of heroics. I crawled out from beneath the covers, peered out the window, but it was too dark to see anything. Then I took the flashlight that I used to read books after bedtime and shined it out the window. A wooded area surrounded my house, and I figured it could be in there somewhere. swore I saw something. It could have been in my imagination every bit as much as I'd dreamed up the count, but I knew the thing I saw was real. Yes, I knew how much trouble I would get into this with my mother. I was already grounded. The worst she could do, though, was compound the punishment. Actually, the worst that could happen was that I could be killed, but I wasn't going to dwell on that possibility. I wanted to stop the creature before the townspeople had to band together and do it. I would never reach my goal by being afraid. My dad kept a rifle in the house. Things were a little different in those days. He kept the weapon not so much because he wanted to shoot burglars, although no one locked their doors here in those days, but he kept it so he could hunt. And he taught me how to shoot too, but only in his presence. Maybe the rifle wouldn't do me any good. I understood that. If you'd seen that beast, you might think it was invincible. It also moved at lightning speed. Plus, I might have been taught how to shoot, but that didn't mean I was very accurate. If I fired and missed, that creature could advance on me in the time needed to fire off another shot. The cool night air nipped at me the moment I stepped outside the house. I then stepped out into the woods, hoping to see the creature that I'd spotted from my window. I shuffled off into the woods with my flashlight in one hand and carrying the rifle over my right shoulder. It made me feel like a soldier, just as my father had been. Despite all of that, I felt sick to my stomach. In fact, I'd felt nauseous after my first confrontation with the beast. I learned in the war that feeling is quite natural. In fact, I would think there's something wrong with you if you don't feel a bit sick after something like that. A rustling sound grabbed my attention. My heart and lungs went into overdrive like the first confrontation, and then my mouth went dry. Each step I took sounded amplified, and I summoned all my willpower to tune it out. I had to be brave after all, remember? I delved deeper into the woods, still finding nothing, until I heard a giant step of footsteps that could only belong to something much larger than any animal I'd ever seen. My flashlight scanned the perimeter until the light landed on an enormous figure. I know how hard this story must be to believe, but what I'm about to say next may sound like the craziest thing yet. It knew me. That is to say, it seemed to remember me from the previous afternoon. I expected it to seem as angry and ferocious as before, but it wasn't. I wouldn't go so far as to say it was docile. That would not be true. Still, I couldn't just stand there. I had to do something. I had to capture this thing somehow. And my rifle was the only tool at my disposal. I dropped the flashlight so I could handle my rifle, and I fired off a shot before it could advance on me. The bullet missed, and I didn't know if it was because of the limited light or because, as I told you, I was a lousy shot. It probably doesn't even matter given how this story ends. But the problem was, I knew I could be in serious trouble. But the creature didn't attack me. It ran off. But I somehow was not satisfied with that. Like I told you, I felt scared before and had something to prove. So I stalked into the woods, understanding I'd gotten off lucky the first time, and maybe I would not be so fortunate the second time around. By then, my breathing had calmed a little. If I could survive the most recent confrontation with the creature, I could do it again. At least, I told myself that. I continued another 20 feet before spotting the creature once more, but then I found something I had never considered. There was a litter of smaller creatures. Now, before, I hadn't considered what the monster's sex might be. It didn't seem important at the moment. But now I saw that this was so much more than just some beast. This was a mother looking after her offspring. I shined my flashlight on them. There were 3 in all, each looking like they must have weighed a good 40 pounds. And to think they would probably grow up to be literally 10 times that size or more. They barely looked at me, seeming so trusting and carefree in their environment, the way a human baby would. Seeing the mother guard her children offered me a much different perspective. This creature didn't scare me anymore. I understood that she was doing what human parents had done since the beginning of time. Setting my rifle down, I hoped that she would understand I meant her no harm. It made no move towards me. In a weird way, I felt like we'd established some kind of an understanding, a loose agreement. After a moment, I picked my rifle up and slowly retreated from the area. She did not follow. People have asked, did I wish I had had a camera back then? No, looking back, I don't regret not having a camera. That was a special moment that was meant to stay between me, the creature, and her babies. You know, sometimes your memory does more for you than some picture ever could. Besides, I didn't need proof of what I saw because I never was going to tell another living soul about it. If I had, the townspeople would have found out, and they would have gone after the creature and her babies for sure. I couldn't let that happen. Like I said, we had an understanding, an agreement, even if that only meant she would not kill me and I would not try to shoot her. I did have some explaining to do because both of my parents had heard me get up in the middle of the night and leave, and they were waiting for me when I got home. I told them that I'd heard something, and I went outside to investigate. I'm a poor liar on the best day, and that excuse at least contained a morsel of truth. The truth was, I wanted to protect the creature and her babies. I'd seen her run through town because she had nowhere else to go. This was 1932, in a sleepy little town, but we had still already built on what she would have considered her territory. But I couldn't tell my parents any of that, and they wouldn't have listened anyway. The punishment that followed was harsh, but in my mind, it was worth it if it meant I kept her secret. After that day, no one saw the mother or her babies, and the monster craze in our town died down after a while, though it did become part of our local legend. Numerous people saw that thing, even if there was no news there to report it. Had something happened like that today, ABC, CBS, CNN, Fox News, and every media outlet that you can think of would have sent their people there in a heartbeat. Our sleepy little town would then enjoy its 15 minutes of fame before the world returned to being ignorant of our existence. I gave an interview for the Public Library's Oral History Collection in 1985. The young lady was asking older residents in town about what our town was like before the telephone and all the paved roads. Of course, I was happy to talk to her. I even felt tempted to tell her about the creature and her babies, but I didn't. In fact, I've still told almost no one about those babies until now. And keep in mind, me and that creature, me and that mother, we had an understanding, an agreement of sorts, and a gentleman keeps his agreements. All right, Sasquatch. I really liked that story. I liked the thought of a little litter of Bigfoot babies. Now, I'm sorry, but the writer didn't give a name that I could use for her or her grandfather. And I'm saying her because of her email address. I'm pretty sure it was female. Anyway, we're going to have to leave this as anonymous. Personally, I love getting these older stories. It makes me wonder how many have been lost forever over the years. All right, Sasquatch. I haven't said anything in a few weeks. I've been busy, but I want to take a second to remind you that I will be at the Mercer County Fairgrounds this October for the Spirit of the Forest Bigfoot Festival. That's happening this October 24th and 25th. Now, that Friday on the 24th, there's a VIP meet and greet dinner, and I'll be there too. So if you haven't already, hop on over to the website and get your tickets. I'll put the link to the video in the video description below, so you can go there and check it all out. All right. I think that's going to do it for now, folks. We'll be getting together again real soon, as always. But until then, please always remember, absence of proof is not proof of absence. Thanks for listening.